48 and I feel like I'm 76 at the moment.
Well, I don't feel so young inside, but anyway, thanks for the compliment.
Mentally 18, my body just doesn't follow the same rules.
Yeah,
and you feel like you're a teenager, you get up and you realize, oops, I shouldn't have done that.
Yeah, I think you got more energy than I have, though. Anyway, okay. Where are the other guys?
They're all there.
I can't see.
Yeah, I'm wearing a mask. I apologize.
Right.
I've got my workshop manager here. He's sitting about a meter away from me.
Get mask. We can all make Kevin feel good.
Okay.
So anyway, at least I look my best.
Okay, guys, let's get started. It's lovely to see all of you today, honestly. Yeah, please. I'm sorry. It really is lovely to see you guys, and I don't mean to rush you. I just need to cover a bit of ground. I've given you permission to record. And I want to thank you guys for having a shirt at 10 a.m. If you had it at 8 a.m., I'd be broken. So thank you. Broken. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asuk b'divrei Torah. Baruch Adonai Eloheinu et divrei Toratcha b'finu u'fi beit Yisrael v'niyeh anachnu v'tzeitzeinu v'tzeitzeimcha beit Yisrael. Kulani Yodea Shemecha v'lomdei Toratecha lishma. Baruch atah Adonai lemei Torah le'amo Yisrael. Amen.
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 Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher b'chabanu mikol hamim v'natan lanu Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen.
Okay. So we're going to hit the Mishnah Brura now. I just want to tell you where we are. On the Mishnah Brura, we're on 181, section 4, and the Shulchan Aruch, 181, section 2. Okay? So we're just discussing the laws of Mayim Achronim and where you should wash up to. So the first thing you should do is the Mayim Achronim is just before benching. It's known as the latter waters. And we explained the reasons for it in the last year. So basically, it's the same as benching in that you need to use another vessel so that the water drops into it, as opposed to, there's one other thing. So just like you'd use a vessel to vas, you do it. But here you need a vessel to collect the water, because now that water is now tuma, it's impure. So you need a container vessel. So generally, if you go to Or Samach or anything like that, they've got two cups. The cup with the spoon in is the cup that's already got a bit of dirty water from people vassing, and they're turning it around. And the primary vessel is got the clean water. That's how they tell the difference. But you simply don't want to leave that water on the table where people will pass over. So it's the same thing that you don't leave fingernails running around. There's a sense of tum on it. So what happens is you've got that holding vessel, and you've got the vassing vessel where you pour it onto that. And then once that happens, you make sure that you throw it away. You either put it down the loo, down the drain, but certainly while you have done the Mayim Achronim, it should be covered. And it should be removed from the table that you're about to bench at, okay? Temperature of the water, you shouldn't use hot water, not even warm water, since the dirt can be absorbed into one's hands as opposed to cleaning it off. You should rather use room temperature or cold water. So how much of the hand to wash? It's best to wash up until the wrist. At a minimum, one should wash any part of the hand that may have touched dirt, grime, or gravy, etc. But you must wash at least until the middle bone of one's finger. In other words, between the knuckles and the little bone at the end of the finger. But the main point is to remove gravy or grime from the hand, so you might need to wash even higher up to clean there too. The practice of using a tiny bit of Mayim Achronim, which doesn't actually wash off dirt, is problematic. So guys, I've been a little bit wrong in terms of that. I've washed just my fingertips. So I've learned something here. So you should also bend one's hand downwards so that the dirty water goes off it and not back down one's arm. But you should wash just more than the fingertips, at least, yeah, preferably up to there. Okay, so we've learned that. So that was a bit of a novelty for me. I used to just do my tips. All right, so now we're going to start the daf. I thought we would never complete the 14th daf. We're on the 15th daf. I'm kind of relieved. So 14 AC finished off. Sorry, that we're going to discuss the eligibility of witnesses, and we're now on 15A1. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen just now. Now, what I thought I'd do in order to share this particular shiur is to give you a quick overview of what we need to discuss, and then I need to explain to you what it means in a little bit of detail. So the first thing that we do is, in order to assess the eligibility of witnesses, I'm just going to actually share, just hang on a second, guys. I don't need to share my screen at this stage, but we were saying witnesses, there are two points of eligibility. The first one is witnesses that are free men and members of the covenant. So when the Tanna states that there must be free men, it's to the exclusion of slaves. And members of the covenant, obviously, is Jewish people, excluding Goyim, Gentiles. And both these teachings are needed. Okay, so I'm going to explain why both the teachings are needed and what this actually means. But before we go into this definition, I wanted to explain to you the different sort of reasons for it. So when we say members of the covenant, what we're actually talking about is Jewish people as opposed to Gentiles. Now, the reason isn't what you might assume. It's not that it's a prejudicial statement. So, for example, I don't know if you've seen in modern courts, what do you think they have when you take an oath?
Bible.
You have a Bible. And where do you think that comes from?
The Torah.
It comes from the Torah. What happened is there's an entire book of Nezikin called Shavuos, which is when you make, not Shavuot as in weeks, but Shavua as in oath, is that you had to make a declaration using Hashem's holy name. And most people, even today, that are not very religious, if they have some semblance of awe of Hashem, they don't want to lie under oath. That's why it's still a very effective practice today. Because if you have something that you believe in and you talk to swear on that, it's very unusual that people would swear on it in vain. But today, obviously, you've got in the last 150 years, since the industrial age and since modern psychology and a variety of other mechanisms, you've got most people that are irreligious, and many of the world's people are atheists. I mean, if you look at currency, what does it say in American currency? It says, "In God we trust." So obviously the founding fathers were living in a very different time, and we're not talking in the time of the Tanoim. We're talking in the last 150 years, where people were generally believed in a higher power. Now, most people are atheistic and they don't. So one of the criteria was that you would have to believe in the process, the legal process of what you were dealing with, as well as have some sort of spiritual understanding that there's consequence for an action. So, for example, say you lived in a society in the middle of India and there was a Hindu system and they believed that a cow was sacred, and they've got that sort of god with 8 legs that looks like the god monkey. It's a god monkey. I'm not being disrespectful. That's how Sam Harris, it's got the face of a monkey, and it looks, the other god looks a bit like an Alsatian, and it's got 8 feet and legs. And I'm honestly not being disrespectful, but growing up in a society, if I show you a picture, it does look like that. They refer to it as the monkey god. I don't know what their name is, but they've got different deities, and it's not disrespectful. We've got Hindu suppliers, and they call it in their name, and it's our monkey god. I don't know what the relevance of it is. And they've got one that looks a bit like a German Shepherd. That's by their own admission. That's got a side profile view of a German Shepherd, you know. So the thing of it is, if you committed a crime in there, in that you did something disrespectful, and they asked you to swear in their particular deity, you're not going to hold with any degree of reverence. Why? Because to you, it's not meaningful. To you, you don't see it as spiritual consequential. And to you, you don't feel that those laws are validating because you don't see any logic in it. So when we say that only members of the covenant are entitled to be witnesses, it's not prejudicial. If you don't believe in a higher power and you don't believe in the law system of the Talmud and the Torah, you're not going to be a successful witness because you're not going to respect that legal process. It's a fact. You know, I mean, we are superstitious even today. If you asked me to sit in an electric chair that wasn't plugged in, I wouldn't do it. Even if I was holding the plug, it just feels creepy to me. If I'm an able-bodied person and I can walk, I wouldn't want to sit in a wheelchair just for fun. It's weird to me. You know, there's a certain sort of weirdness that and superstition that we have that even really relatively secular people wouldn't take an oath in God's name because they'd feel a bit creepy about it, because somewhere inside them, they know that their word has meaning. So unless you have those two factors, that they believe in the Torah and the Talmud and they believe in a higher power, you cannot have them as a witness. It's not just that it's prejudicial. So I needed to explain that. Then the second thing is it excludes slaves. So let me just tell you there are two different types of slaves. There's a reference to Avadim Knanim and Avadim Ivri. So an Avadim Ivri is a Jewish slave, and a Jewish slave has rights the same as any other Jewish person. And in fact, he, as Gavin mentioned the other day, often a Jewish person, which I answered, becomes indentured as a slave because he might have stolen, and he needs to make restitution on their payment with the use of his labor. But he is treated very well to the extent that he's treated as a member of the family, that if there's one pillar left, the master has to give it to him as opposed to using it himself. But halachically, he's a fully fledged Jew. So a Jewish slave can serve as a witness, and a Gentile slave, for the same reason as a Gentile can't, we serve as a witness. There are certain other reasons. So what we're going to discuss is that basically we're going to discuss the reasons now, and then I'm going to go into the halachic proof of it. Okay? So this is what the Gemara is saying. So witnesses who are free and members of the covenant can be legit. Gavin, your mark's on. Gav?
Yeah, sorry.
No problem. Can be eligible witnesses. So this members of the covenant excludes Gentiles and free men excludes slaves. So why did we need both statements? Because if the Mishnah taught us that only a slave cannot serve as a witness, I might have thought this is because he has no lineage. But a Gentile who does have lineage, I might have said he's not excluded from serving as a witness if I only had the one statement and not the other. And if the Mishnah taught us that a Gentile cannot serve as a witness, I might have said this is because he has no connection to the commandments of the Torah. But a slave who does not have a connection to the commandments, I might say he's not excluded as serving as a witness. So I just wanted to explain this to you guys. The first thing of it is we're not talking about a Jewish Eved, a slave. That for sure can serve as a witness because he has a connection to the Torah. Okay? We're talking about a Canaanite slave that does not have a lineage. So I just wanted to explain to you what this means. We already said that Gentiles do not have a connection to the Torah because they are only obligated to the 7 Noahide laws, which means any of the laws that are pertaining to the 613 mitzvot, they don't adhere to, and therefore they're not eligible witnesses. So I'm going to share my screen now and explain to you what this statement actually means. Okay. Tell me if you can see the screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Right. So how did we get this? We said it is what the halacha applies before a court, and what is based upon the testimony of witnesses who are free men, men who are not Canaanite slaves, who are members of the covenant Jews. Okay, so what I wanted to go through is a specific thing about what this means in terms of no lineage. So in other words, I might have said that the reason a Canaanite slave, let me just put it to you like this, cannot serve as a witness is because he doesn't have lineage and a Gentile does. So let me explain to you what this concept of lineage is. It says here, Marco, do you want to read? Rav Chisda.
Okay, Rav Chisda says a Canaanite slave is permitted to marry his mother, and he's permitted to marry his daughter. This is because he has left the category of a Gentile by immersing in a ritual bath for the purpose of becoming a slave to a Jew, and consequently all his previous family relationships are disregarded according to halakha. But he has not entered the category of a Jew, as evidenced by the fact that he is not obligated to observe all of the mitzvot of male Jews. Therefore, the decree of the sages prohibiting the maternal relatives of converts does apply to him. So,
Okay.
sorry, I can't see the word. It does not apply to him.
Doesn't apply to him. So this is teaching you two things. Firstly, that according to the halachot, he doesn't. It's not incumbent upon him to be obligated to serve all the mitzvot according to male Jews. But that seems to imply that he's got extra categories of mitzvot to observe. So we're going to go through that later. The main thing I want you to know here is that he doesn't have lineage, meaning that whatever his previous relationships were halachically are not the same. In other words, rules of, let me just bring this in your Vamot here. Here. Gentiles have family lineage. When they convert, they do not have family lineage. With regard to a Canaanite slave, he does not have lineage. Does that make sense? So what we're saying here, guys, is that normal rules of being a Gentile, meaning that there's certain averos that are prohibited. What are those averos that are prohibited? Okay, let me just see if I can find it for you. Here is that the descendants of Noah are forbidden about certain laws of sexual immorality. One of them is incest. One of them is bestiality. Now, this is within that law of prohibited relationships, sexual immorality. Now, the 7 Noahide laws, within that category of sexual immorality that is forbidden, the one is homosexuality. It says, and shall cleave to his wife, but not a male. Okay? He's not allowed to commit adultery, not the wife of another man. Okay? He's not allowed to conduct in bestiality, and he's not allowed to be involved with incest. These are forbidden to all the descendants of Noah. Are you with me? But with a Canaanite slave, he can permit to marry his mother or his daughter because he's left the category of a Gentile, and now he has no paternal connection to his children. And therefore, because he doesn't have lineage, he is free from some of the mitzvot that even the goyim are obligated to keep. And in that case, he certainly can't serve as a witness. Does that make sense? So if a non-Jew can't, because he can't fulfill 613 mitzvot, and he is obligated only to 7, how much more so is it the case of a Canaanite that now is permitted to do things that even goyim can't? So to even Kal V'chomer, even more so, he should not serve as a witness. So what we are saying here in the Daf is that if we were just told about Canaanite slaves, we might have thought that Gentiles can serve as witnesses because Canaanite slaves are allowed to conduct themselves with certain types of incestuous relationships, like even, for example, paternal issues, like cursing one's father. A goy is forbidden to do that. but a Canaanite slave can, because there's no connection the minute he goes into a ritual bath. So we're saying that initially, if it just mentioned the Canaanite slave, you could have assumed that a normal Gentile, because he has lineage, could serve as a witness. Fine. So now we know why it was mentioned, both the slave and the Canaanite slave and the Gentile. But now we say, what happens if you mention the Gentile? That didn't mean, then obviously, then you couldn't have a Canaanite slave as a witness. Do any of you guys have a question here as to why that could be? Guys, can you put yourselves on speaker?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question? Sorry, I didn't
What
hear
I'm
it clearly.
saying is we learned that because with the Canaanite slave, he's even allowed to have certain relationships that the descendants of Noah are not allowed to have. And you can even, for example, there's no connection to your father, so the Avera of cursing your father, even with a non-Jew would apply, but it doesn't apply with regard to a Canaanite slave. There's no connection to his biological father. So in that particular case, where he's allowed to do almost a lot more than a normal goy, we can say that because he doesn't have lineage and he is forbidden as a witness, then, and he, why would we say that Gentiles are forbidden that have lineage? Because they are applicable to the Noahide laws, which means they are applicable to certain mitzvot. So we're saying that if it mentions Canaanite slaves who can't do any of these things, that are even more than a non-Jew, then we're saying that we had to mention the case of Gentiles in general, because they're also not allowed to do certain things, but they are allowed to do a lot more than Jews. And because the halachic restrictions of a Jew is even more than a non-Jew is not eligible as witness in a Jewish court, because they're pretty much free to do everything other than the 7 Noahide prohibitions or laws. So what we're asking is something else here. We're saying that why would we have thought a Canaanite slave could be a witness? What is the reason? That's what I wanted to ask you guys. We haven't got long left.
Because of the fact that the Canaanite slave is able to do a little bit more. Firstly, his lineage is taken away from him. And
no, that's a reason that he can't, Gav. Because
no, so that's the reason he can't. But I'm just giving you the whole thing. So he's then immersed in water. I presume a mikvah or something like that, and that enables him to get a little bit more leniency in the fact that he's permitted to marry his mother and his daughter. You know, you can swear at his father. So all those type of things, he has less restrictions than.
No, but that's the reason why he can't serve. So what I'm saying is this. All right, guys, let me just make one thing clear. If a Canaanite slave that is prohibited even less than a non-Jew, where he can't have incestuous relationships or any of these sort of paternal issues, halachically, if we're saying that he's prevented as a witness, okay, we might have said that it might be okay for a Gentile too, because a Gentile is obligated to 7 Noahide laws, and therefore it's more stringent, so he might become a witness. And that's the reason why we say we have to have a special mention that Gentiles can't be a witness, because even though they have to keep more halachas than a slave, they still don't keep as many halachas as a Jewish person, and therefore there had to be a separate mention of a Canaanite slave as opposed to a Gentile. Then what we were saying is that why can't a Canaanite slave serve as a witness even though you barred a Gentile? Because this is the reason, is that a Canaanite slave can adhere to certain mitzvahs. Let me explain to you what the status is here. Okay? Is that they basically...
He doesn't have the full...
Let me finish, but this is what I'm trying to say to you, is that if you have a look at Chagiga, okay, look here. Gavin, read it. The Gemara asks...
The Gemara asks, why do I need a verse to teach this halacha? After all, with regard to every mitzvah in which a woman is obligated, the slave is also obligated in that mitzvah. And with regard to every mitzvah in which a woman is not obligated, the slave is not obligated in it either. The reason for this principle is that it is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the phrase to her, Leviticus 19.20, written with regard to designated maidservant, and the phrase to her, Deuteronomy 24.2, written with regard to a divorced woman.
Okay, so all it's saying is here is very simple, guys, is that halachically a Canaanite slave becomes elevated to the degree where they keep non-time-bound mitzvahs, exactly the same as a woman, exactly the same. So a woman can't do a time-bound mitzvah like tefillin, etc., because she has to take care of her husband and the children and has got obligations and doesn't need that extra pressure. A slave's time is not his own. It belongs to his master, just like an employee that works for a boss. It's not his own. So therefore, he's not obligated in time-bound mitzvahs. But every other mitzvah that a woman is obligated, so is the Canaanite slave, the minute he goes into a mikveh. So we might have thought that a Gentile that is not obligated to do the mitzvahs is at a lower level than a Canaanite slave who is obligated to do the same mitzvahs as women are, any non-time-bound mitzvah. And therefore, a Canaanite slave can serve as a witness. And just like, for example, if a person is Jewish and they convert and they technically have a daughter, his daughter is no longer halachically prohibited to him because she doesn't resemble him. Does that make sense? I know it's difficult to wrap your mind around that. If a father converts, his daughter is no longer, even his non-Jewish daughter, prohibited to him because he's become a new person the minute he hits the mikveh. So we're saying the same thing with the slave, is that just because they're not obligated in terms of paternal mitzvot, because their family is no longer part of them in terms of lineage, so too when a non-Jewish person converts and obligated to all the mitzvahs, there's no such thing as incestuous relationships, simply because that they've got no physical connection to their family anymore. They are now halachically Jewish. So we're saying we might have come to think that a Canaanite slave that's obligated for every mitzvah that a woman is, except for a time-bound mitzvah, because his time is not his own, is elevated, and therefore can serve as a witness. Does that make sense? So we needed the specific mention of both the Gentile cannot serve as a witness as well as a Canaanite slave. And I'm going to just quickly read it from the beginning, and now it's going to make more sense now that I've explained it. But I wanted you guys to understand here where it is. In other words, yeah. In this manner, the entire Torah is juxtaposed to phylacteries, that's tefillin. So basically, from the fact that women are exempt from every positive time-bound mitzvah, one can learn by inference that women are obligated in every positive mitzvah that is not time-bound. Let me just see if I can find it here. All right. Okay. So I've read to you from Yevamot in terms of lineage, etc. Let me just stop sharing the screen. Okay. And I'm just going to repeat it, and it's going to make more sense. I had to give you this background. So again, witnesses that are free men and members of the covenant are eligible witnesses. So the Tana states they must be free men to the exclusion of slaves, members of the covenant to exclude Gentiles. And both these teachings are needed. For if the Mishnah taught us only that a slave cannot serve as a witness, I might have said it's because he has no lineage. But a Gentile who does have lineage, I might have said is not excluded from serving as a witness. And if the Mishnah taught us only that a Gentile cannot serve as a witness, I might have said this is because he has no connection to the commandments of the Torah. But a slave who does have connection to commandments, I might say, is not excluded from serving as a witness. Therefore, both teachings are therefore needed. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah, but
Because-
if you're referring to a Canaanite slave,
Yes, a Jewish slave for sure can serve as a witness. So I want both of you guys to give me the reasons backwards and forwards in terms of why we thought a Gentile could serve as a witness, why we thought a Canaanite slave can, why we thought that a Canaanite slave can't and a Gentile can't. I want you to give me those 4 reasons. I've just given you.
so the Canaanite slave has he does have he does fulfill some of the mitzvahs. He does pretty much everything that a woman can do. He's entitled to do, which is the non-time bound mitzvahs.
Good. And
So because of that, you would think that he has a covenant with Hashem, but he doesn't. So he doesn't have the same covenant as what a Yid has.
So
Okay.
just interestingly enough on that point, women can't serve as aidim in a lot of the cases. You should know. You do know that the misogyny, Women's Life's First movement will be not happy with the shir. But the reality is that in many, as far as I know, they're ineligible to serve as witnesses in certain cases. I don't know if in all cases, but certainly in many cases. Schottenstein told you that. So just like a woman can't, a Canaanite slave can't. So that should give one a clue as well. So Gavin, well done. That's exactly it. You would have thought that a Canaanite slave might be allowed to because he's connected to all the non-time bound mitzvahs and therefore has a greater connection to the Torah than a standard Gentile. That's great. That's a good answer. Now, why would you think that a Canaanite slave, if a Gentile was allowed to serve as a witness, cannot serve as a witness? Let me ask you the question the other way around.
You might think because the Gentile has lineage.
And therefore?
And because he has lineage, and he has, and he's stricter on the 7 ayat laws as well. He can't have incense. He can't marry his daughter. All that type of stuff. Because they're completely bound to the 7 ayat laws, you would think that he would be able to serve as a witness.
So are you saying because a normal Gentile is stricter in certain regards, you would think he would be more eligible than a standard Canaanite slave in terms
Correct.
of certain relationships? Good. That's good logic. Now, the refutation to that logic is that any non-Jew that converts fully to become a Yid and now incumbent upon him the 613 mitzvot, those relationships where he had a connection to his family in terms of lineage no longer apply. And since he can, as a Jew now, be a full witness, that logic would fall away. In other words, that logic falls away the minute you're more learned, because you say, hang on, he can marry his non-Jewish daughter because there's no lineage connection to her anymore. He's got no lineage to his biological father. So if he does say the guy was a rotten scoundrel, and he used to put a cigarette out in my eye and, this is what I wish of him, there's no paternal connection. So the minute one learns, a lot of the halachas are here because the more learned you get, the more that logic is refuted based on the principles of why that logic was derived. So the same thing we could say with regards to a Canaanite slave is we might not make the same inference for a woman, because one of the reasons why women can't serve as witnesses is because they sometimes think with emotions, not logic. Schottenstein brought this up. And that sometimes that their compassion would lead them to not be effective witnesses because they might crack under the emotional pressure. They might not want to convict somebody. There's all the emotional side running in the brain without the pure logic callousness that men have. So let me just say that is that a man will give testimony without being emotionally volatile. I guarantee you that a Canaanite slave on that basis, if he's obligated for all the non-time-bound mitzvahs, if he's a male slave, he would be eligible on the fact that male witnesses are allowed. Does that make sense? So if you're more learned, one could say that, hang on, maybe a Canaanite slave is allowed, and then maybe a Canaanite slave is allowed also because just like a non-Jew that converts has got no lineage, so to a slave, and therefore it would seem that he should be more eligible. But when we mention the fact that a Canaanite slave, clear, is not allowed, and a Gentile is not allowed, that would cancel out that. That's as clear as day. So you need both those statements to be clear on that the eligible witness cannot be a slave, he has to be a free man, and also has to be a member of the covenant. Also, what you've got to realize is that one of the other reasons that slaves were forbidden to be witnesses is that they were subjugated to the will of their master. So there might be a vested interest. In other words, we learned this once before, that if I want to damage my neighbor, and I don't have to be responsible for my slave doing the damage because it said that your slave could be upset with you and cause damage to your neighbor and therefore incur a cost to you. I could turn around and say, I don't like my neighbor. I'm not going to be liable if you scratch the Porsche, key the Porsche. I don't like him. They're not going to hold me responsible because you've got your own will. Maybe you're getting back at me. So go and key the Porsche. I'll give you $4,000 to key the Porsche. You get what I'm saying? So we don't trust the motives of somebody whose time is not their own and who is under a lot of pressure. All right, on that note, guys, I think we can end this year. Well done to all of you. Gavin, well done in terms of your responses. Arthur, shame, I know you're feeling not well. Michael just woke up and all of us are feeling haggard. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this year, and I hope I made it clear.
Thank you, Captain.
You did very well, and I held my breath for the entire show.
Shame, man. I'm sorry about that.
I hope you guys appreciate that.
We do.
All right. Thanks for keeping it a bit short because I can breathe again.
All right.
All right. Well done. Thank you. Thanks, guys.